I thought I was hunting down a stray animal in my kitchen, until the thief turned and I saw her ears. If you love epic HFY stories, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next tale. The apartment was supposed to be quiet. Just 4 walls, a worn couch, and a man who worked too much and slept too little. But lately, something was wrong. Groceries disappeared without explanation. Doors left ajar when he swore he'd shut them. At first he thought it was his own exhaustion playing tricks, until the day he found crumbs scattered across the counter, still warm from food he hadn't touched. That was when the unease began to grow, when the silence of his home no longer felt empty, but occupied. Evan Locke lived in a rhythm so precise it could have been measured by clockwork. Up at 6, coffee poured into the same chipped mug, commute through the rusting transit lines into the city's warehouse district. 8 hours of lifting, loading, scanning manifests. The work wasn't glamorous, but it paid rent and kept the lights on. At the end of each day, he came home to his modest 2-room apartment, reheated leftovers, and the occasional distraction of old books or late-night broadcasts. It wasn't much, but it was his. Predictable. Safe. Which was why the small oddities gnawed at him so fiercely. The first time he noticed, it was nothing dramatic. A loaf of bread half gone, though he swore he'd only cut 1 slice. He chalked it up to forgetting, to eating more than he remembered. Then the milk level dipped lower than it should have. A pack of frozen dumplings, something he'd saved for a Friday, was gone outright. He frowned at his receipts, did the math twice. He wasn't losing his mind. Days turned into weeks, and the signs multiplied. A jar of jam with sticky edges when he hadn't touched it. A spoon left drying in the sink he hadn't used. And stranger still, his blanket folded awkwardly, as if someone had lain across it and left in a hurry. Evan began to wonder if the building had a pest problem. Rats, maybe? The older residents liked to swap horror stories about vermin. But what kind of rat pulled the lid off peanut butter, or zipped a bag closed again? The thought unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. At work, his friends ribbed him for being quiet, for drifting off mid-shift, but his head wasn't on the job anymore. He was distracted, replaying mental images of his apartment. He pictured shadows moving when he wasn't there, cupboards opening and closing. It was absurd. Yet every night, walking up the stairs, he caught himself listening too closely, half expecting to hear movement behind his locked door. By the 3rd week, paranoia had taken root. Evan started testing himself. Before leaving in the morning, he made careful note of every detail: the chair pushed in, the placement of his shoes, the angle of the dish towel on the counter. Returning at night, he'd find something shifted. A chair nudged out. The towel gone. He cursed under his breath, telling himself maybe he just didn't remember. But that lie was wearing thin. One Thursday evening, after another long day on the loading docks, he stepped into his apartment and froze. The smell of reheated noodles clung to the air. Not from yesterday, not from anything he'd cooked. Something recent, fresh enough to still hang there like steam. The kitchen was spotless. Too spotless. The counter gleamed, not a crumb in sight. And yet the garbage bin told the truth, a styrofoam container he hadn't bought, tucked at the bottom beneath his old wrappers. Someone had been here. Someone was eating here. He locked the door harder that night, wedging a chair under the handle. It didn't help. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening, waiting. Every creak of the pipes, every gust rattling the glass sounded like footsteps. By morning, the chair was still in place. The locks untouched. Nothing out of order. But when he reached for his cereal, the box was gone. Evan swore. Something was wrong, and whatever it wasn't going away on its own. Evan wasn't the sort of man to believe in ghosts, but by the next week he would have welcomed a ghost over whatever was happening. A ghost at least didn't eat your groceries. He decided to be methodical. If it was a pest, he could prove it. If it was a thief, he'd catch them. He bought a cheap bag of flour and scattered a dusting across the kitchen floor before leaving for work. Any animal would leave tracks, even a clever one. That night, he came home to find the flour scattered, the counter wiped down, and not a single print. He crouched on the tile, running a finger through the powder. Someone had cleaned it deliberately. Not a raccoon. Not a rat. Someone smart. Someone who knew he was testing them. The next day, he tried again. This time, he left an apple on the counter, shiny and untouched, as bait. He positioned a small stack of cans in front of it. Even if he didn't hear anything, the cans would tumble if disturbed. When he returned, the apple was gone. The cans still stood perfectly stacked. Evan rubbed his temples. You've got to be kidding me. He started losing focus at work. The conveyor belts clattered, crates slid past, his co-workers called out instructions, and still his thoughts circled back to his apartment. What was clever enough to avoid every test? More importantly, what was daring enough to keep coming back after knowing it was being hunted? On the third night, he went further. He set his phone up with the flashlight angled across the room, balanced so a shadow would cut across the beam if something moved. He positioned it facing the door to the kitchen, pressed record, and left for his shift. When he came home, the phone was dead. Battery drained to zero, despite being nearly full that morning. He charged it nervously, waiting for it to power back on. When it did, the video file was gone. Deleted. Not corrupted, deleted. That was when his nerves really started to fray. He began double-checking locks obsessively. Not just the front door, but the windows, even the tiny bathroom vent. He even taped slips of paper across the thresholds to see if they were disturbed. Every single day, the paper came back torn. It was driving him insane. And yet, there was no sign of malice. His furniture remained in place. His things weren't stolen, save for food. He found no vandalism, no threats. Only the same pattern, groceries dwindling, the faintest suggestion of someone existing alongside him in secret. It almost felt like courtesy. Whoever was there ate carefully, cleaned up carefully, as though they didn't want him to know. That courtesy was somehow worse than outright burglary. One night, frustrated and restless, Evan sat at his kitchen table long past midnight. His arms crossed, his eyes heavy. He'd decided he wouldn't sleep, wouldn't give whoever it was the chance. He waited. And waited. Sometime near dawn, exhaustion won. His head dropped against his arm, and he slipped under. When he woke, the kitchen was empty. The fridge light clicked on, revealing a fresh gap where leftovers had been. They'd walked right past him. Sat in the same room while he slept. The thought sent a shiver through him. He wasn't just being stolen from, he was being studied. The worst part? He felt no anger in that moment. Only curiosity. Who or what was sharing his home, careful enough to never leave a trace, bold enough to dine inches away from him without fear? The next week bled into something closer to obsession. Evan's coworkers started noticing his distraction. "You're jumpy, Locke," one of them muttered while they stacked crates. "You seeing someone, or being haunted?" "Neither," Evan said, though the words felt empty even to him. Haunted was closer to the truth than he wanted to admit. Because now the signs weren't subtle anymore. One morning, after locking up the night before, he walked into the kitchen and froze. His skillet sat on the stove, still warm, a faint oily smell lingering in the air. He hadn't cooked anything in days. The dishes were washed and set carefully to dry. They weren't just taking food now, they were cooking. Evan touched the pan with 2 fingers. He swore he could feel the faintest heat still clinging to the metal. That was too much. He tore through the apartment, checking every closet, every cabinet, even under the bed. Nothing. The space was small enough that if someone had been inside, they should have had nowhere to hide. Yet they had been here. The intruder wasn't just clever. They were bold. The nights grew stranger. He would lay down and swear he heard a floorboard creak, the faint shuffle of cloth. One night, he bolted upright certain he'd heard laughter. A low, breathy sound from the kitchen. He rushed in, flicked on the light, empty. The only movement was the hum of the refrigerator. His traps grew more elaborate. He rigged a bell to the door. It never rang. He taped thin lines of string across the hallway. They were always intact in the morning. Yet the food still vanished, always neat, always careful. The lack of aggression didn't calm him. It unsettled him more. If this were a thief, why not take his electronics, his cash, anything of value? If it were an animal, why clean? Why delete videos? The pattern didn't fit anything he understood. Then came the night he discovered his bed disturbed again. This time, it wasn't just a blanket pulled out of place. The sheets held the clear impression of someone curling up at the edge. And there, almost hidden against the pillowcase, was a single strand of red hair. He held it between his fingers, the tiny filament glimmering under the lamplight. Too fine for animal fur, too vibrant to belong to him. He turned it over and over, his thoughts circling like vultures. A fox. He'd thought before it might be a fox, given the scraps of red fuzz he'd found once by the couch. But foxes didn't leave human-shaped indentations in beds. Foxes didn't fry eggs and clean dishes afterward. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. What the hell is going on in here? Every day after that, his nerves tightened further. He began listening for sounds before even unlocking the door, his ear pressed to the frame. He'd enter in silence, waiting to catch something in the act. But it was always the same, a hint of smell, a missing meal, a place too neat. The thought clawed at him. He wasn't just being stolen from. He was living alongside someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone cautious enough to dodge every attempt, but desperate enough to keep coming back. The tension built like a coiled spring. He was done chasing shadows. He needed to see. He needed to know. That was when he decided. One way or another, he would catch them. And to do it, he would have to change tactics. Evan's patience had been ground down to nothing. Weeks of paranoia, of setting traps that failed, of questioning his own memory. Enough. He began leaving small tests in places only he would notice. Tiny folds in his blanket, pencils laid out in neat alignment, the smallest dab of honey on a plate's edge. Each night when he returned, they'd been disturbed. Just enough to prove someone was moving freely through his home. The final straw came on a Sunday evening. He tossed his work shirt on the bed, then froze. Along the edge of the comforter, caught in the weave of the fabric, was a tuft of fur. Not hair this time, actual fur, coppery red, soft against his fingertips. A chill rippled down his spine. He turned it over in his palm, staring. This wasn't a raccoon's dark bristle or a stray dog's coarse coat. This was fine, sleek, wild in color yet strangely clean. Fox, he muttered. He said it aloud, as if naming it might make sense of it. But a fox couldn't turn knobs, delete video files, or cook. Unless it wasn't just a fox. The thought was ridiculous, but then again, so was everything else about this. That night he sat in his chair with the lights off, staring at the locked door. His heart thudded like a hammer in his chest. If this was a wild animal, it was clever beyond belief. If it wasn't, what was he letting wander through his life? Either way, he couldn't keep chasing shadows. Evan's plan formed simple but sharp. He wouldn't leave for work at all. At least not really. He'd pretend. Give his unseen guest a chance to come out of hiding. And then he'd know. He had to know. He prepared carefully. The next morning, he dressed as usual, slung his bag over his shoulder, and locked the door loud enough to echo down the hall. He even clomped down the stairwell, pausing on the second landing to wait. Minutes stretched. His breath slowed. His ears strained for sound. Then, faint, almost imperceptible, a click. His own door unlocking. He stiffened. Whoever it was, they hadn't just found a way in. They had a key, or a method precise enough to open the lock without breaking it. He swallowed his nerves, waited until silence returned, then crept back up. His shoes muffled against the steps, key sliding into the knob he just heard turn. This was it. No more guessing. With one steadying breath, he pushed the door open. The apartment looked ordinary at first glance. The couch, the coffee table, the stack of dishes in the sink. But the air carried that now familiar warmth of something living here when he was gone. And just beyond the frame of the kitchen doorway, movement. A shadow flickered. The faint sound of cabinets opening. He stepped inside, slow, silent, closing the door behind him. Whatever was haunting his life was just a few steps away, flesh and blood, moving freely through his home. And this time, Evan wouldn't miss it. Evan edged closer to the kitchen, his pulse quickening. The shadow shifted again, and he heard the faint scrape of a drawer sliding open. His muscles tightened. This was it. No more signs, no more traces. He would finally see what had been slipping through his life like smoke. He rounded the corner in silence. And froze. Standing at his counter, mid-reach for a loaf of bread, was no raccoon, no thief, no fox. It was something in between. A young woman, slender, wrapped in threadbare rags that clung desperately to her frame. Her hair, a deep russet red, tumbled down her back in wild tangles, and from the crown of her head rose two pointed ears, furred and twitching as if they had caught his presence before her eyes had. Behind her swayed a tail, thick and bushy, the same fiery color as her hair. It flicked once, stiff, betraying her shock. She turned slowly, loaf in hand, her eyes going wide. They gleamed amber gold in the dim light. For a moment the world seemed to stop, silence stretching into a taut string. Either of them moved. Then she bolted. In a blur, she shot toward the door, her bare feet pattering against the floorboards. But Evan was quicker. Driven by instinct, he lunged and planted himself in the doorway, bracing both hands against the frame. She skidded to a halt just short of colliding with him. For a heart, then her ears flattened and her tail puffed in alarm. "Please," she said, voice raw, desperate. "Please don't hurt me. I'll go. I swear I'll go." Evan's jaw worked, but no words came out. He had expected an animal. A pest. Even a burglar. Not this. Not a foxwoman standing in his apartment, trembling in rags with a loaf of bread clutched like her life depended on it. She pressed back against the counter, amber eyes flicking to the window as though she might fling herself through it if he forced her. "I didn't mean," her voice cracked, then steadied. "I didn't mean to steal so much. I just needed food. Just enough to stay alive." Her words hit him harder than he expected. Weeks of paranoia, of chasing shadows, had all led to this moment. And now, staring at her, all he could feel was the weight of her fear. "Who are you?" he managed at last. She blinked rapidly, her ears twitching, uncertain if it was a demand or an invitation. Her lips parted, but no name came. Only a plea. "Please! Let me go." Evan didn't move. His arms barred the door, and though he wasn't threatening her, his stance left no escape. The foxwoman swallowed, her tail lashing with nervous energy. "I thought you'd be gone longer," she whispered, voice almost inaudible. "I thought you'd never notice. I tried to clean, to leave things as they were. But I was so hungry." Her hands tightened around the bread, as if surrendering it would mean surrendering herself. She stood on the edge of panic, her whole body trembling between fight and flight. Evan stared, heart pounding, mind racing. He had wanted to know what was haunting his home. Now the truth stood trembling in front of him, and it was nothing he'd ever imagined. The loaf slipped from her hands and thumped against the floor, rolling a few inches before stopping near Evan's boot. She didn't move to pick it up. Her hands stayed pressed against her chest, fingers curled tight as if she could shield herself with nothing but fear. "I'll leave right now," she stammered. "You'll never see me again. Please don't call the enforcers. Please don't tell anyone." Her words came in a rush, like she'd rehearsed them countless times before. Her tail lashed once behind her, then drooped low, a signal of defeat even her voice couldn't disguise. Evan kept his stance in the doorway, but the anger he thought he'd feel never came. Weeks of missing food, sleepless nights, and paranoia, all of it seemed strangely hollow now that he was looking at her. The creature he'd hunted wasn't a monster. She was a starving girl with ears pinned flat in terror, dressed in rags that looked like they hadn't known a wash in months. He bent slowly, never breaking eye contact, and picked up the bread. She flinched as he straightened again, as though expecting him to hurl it at her like a weapon. Instead, he set it gently on the counter. "Sit," he said. His voice wasn't commanding, just steady. "Talk with me." She shook her head violently, strands of hair falling across her eyes. "You wouldn't understand. You're human. You've got everything." Evan gave a humorless laugh. "Everything? You think a man working double shifts to afford noodles has everything?" Her eyes flicked to him, startled. It was the first crack in her wall of panic. "I wasn't going to stay," she said quickly. "I just needed a place. Just for a night. But then, it was warm here. Safe. I didn't mean to take so much." Her words trembled now, and though she tried to look away, her eyes brimmed with something between shame and exhaustion. Evan leaned a shoulder against the doorframe, loosening his stance. "You've been here for weeks. Eating, cooking, sleeping. I thought I was losing my mind. I'm sorry," she whispered, and this time her voice didn't sound rehearsed. It was raw, brittle. "I didn't want you to notice me. I thought if I was careful enough, I could just slip away each time. No one's supposed to see me." "Why not?" Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. She looked down, ears sagging against her tangled hair. "Because when they do, they chase me out. Or worse. You don't know what it's like to be hated on sight." The words hit harder than he expected. He saw it in her trembling shoulders, in the way her tail tried to curl around her legs like a shield. She wasn't just hungry, she was hunted. He studied her for a long moment. She shifted under his gaze, shrinking back, but she didn't run. Maybe she couldn't anymore. Finally, he exhaled and asked quietly, "Do you have a name?" Her head lifted, eyes wide at the question. No accusation? No threat. Just a name. "Ashira," she murmured at last. Evan nodded slowly. "Ashira." He said it as though testing the weight of it, grounding it in the room. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to ask why he hadn't forced her out already, why he was saying her name instead of shouting for help. But no words came. She only stared at him, torn between suspicion and a fragile, dangerous hope. Ashira's name lingered between them, fragile as glass. Her ears twitched, straining for some hidden cruelty in his voice. When none came, she hugged her arms around herself, ragged sleeves drooping past her elbows. "You should throw me out," she whispered. "You should. That's what people do." Evan leaned against the frame, crossing his arms loosely. "If I wanted you gone, you'd already be on the street." Her golden eyes narrowed, suspicious. "Then why aren't you?" "Because you're not some thief casing my place. You're not here for anything but food and a roof. And I get it." He shrugged. "Hungry people do what they need to survive." She shook her head, tail flicking side to side. "You don't get it. You'll change your mind once you realize what I am. Everyone does." "I've been chasing shadows for weeks," Evan said evenly. "Losing sleep, doubting myself, setting traps like an idiot. And now I finally know what's been happening. That's enough. I'm not about to call the enforcers because you were desperate." Her throat tightened. He could see it in the way she clutched her arms. "You'd let me stay?" The words tumbled out like she didn't believe them even as she spoke. Evan didn't answer right away. He walked to the counter, pulled out a chair, and sat heavily, rubbing his temples. He felt her gaze follow every move, waiting for the inevitable snap, the order to leave. Instead, he looked up at her and said simply, "Yes. Stay. You don't need to sneak anymore." Silence pressed between them. Ashira blinked once, twice, as if trying to process a language she hadn't heard before. "Humans don't offer things like that," she said at last, voice sharp with disbelief. They don't mean it. I'm not most people." That earned him a sharp laugh, brittle but real. "You'll regret it. I eat a lot more than bread. Good thing I buy groceries, then." He managed a faint smile. Her tail swayed behind her, restless, betraying nerves she couldn't contain. She stepped forward a half pace, then stopped, staring at him like she was waiting for the trick, the trap hidden in his kindness. When none came, she pressed her palms together, lowering her head. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why show me mercy?" Evan didn't flinch from the question. "Because no one else has. And someone should." Her breath caught, a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. She sank down onto her knees, the rags of her clothes pooling around her as though her strength had finally given out. "I don't know how to live anywhere else," she admitted. "I only know how to hide." "Then you don't have to hide anymore." For a long time she stayed there, trembling on the floor, searching his face for betrayal. Finding none, her shoulders loosened, her ears lifted from their defeated slump. Slowly she rose again, brushing hair from her eyes with shaky fingers. "All right," she said. It wasn't defiance, nor surrender. Just a small, cautious agreement, like a seed pressed into soil. "I'll stay. If you'll have me." Evan nodded once, firm. Then it settled. Ashira let out a shaky laugh, rubbing at her eyes with the heel of her hand. "You're a strange human. Maybe. But this strange human's kitchen is yours now. Just," he gave a half smirk, "ask before you raid the fridge." Her tail flicked once, and for the first time that night she smiled. Small. Tentative. But real. Life after that night shifted in ways Evan hadn't expected. At first, it was awkward, two strangers occupying the same small space, tiptoeing around each other like the apartment had turned into a minefield. Ashira lingered in corners, perched on the edge of the couch or curled up with her tail wrapped tightly around herself. She watched him cook, her sharp eyes following every slice of the knife, every hiss of a pan, as if trying to decide if she was still an intruder or finally allowed. Evan made the decision easy. He set a second plate on the table every night without comment. The first time, she hesitated, ears twitching with suspicion, until he simply sat and began eating. Slowly, she joined him. From then on, it became habit. She ate like someone who had never known a steady meal, quick bites at first, then slower once she realized no one was going to snatch it away. He'd catch her sneaking glances at him, her golden eyes uncertain, as if trying to figure out what kind of man gave food freely. The apartment grew louder in subtle ways. No longer empty, no longer hushed. Ashira hummed under her breath when she thought he couldn't hear. She muttered complaints when the floor was too cold. She even teased him one morning, flicking her tail against his leg when he grumbled about the alarm clock. "Your routines are strange," she said, sprawled across his couch while he laced his boots. "They keep me alive," he answered dryly. Her ears flicked. "So did sneaking into your kitchen." He didn't argue with that. In return, she proved useful in small, unexpected ways. The sink never piled high anymore. She washed dishes as naturally as breathing. The floor stayed swept, crumbs gone before he even noticed them. She rearranged shelves, grumbling about efficiency, but her system actually made sense. Evan found himself looking forward to coming home. Instead of silence, there was always some sign of her, tail draped over the couch arm, soft laughter at an old broadcast, or the smell of something cooking with whatever she dared experiment with. It was chaos, but it was warm. Still, trust wasn't instant. Some nights she would vanish to the balcony, staring out at the city with her tail wrapped tightly around her knees. He'd leave her be, letting her come back inside on her own. Other times she startled easily, every noise outside sending her ears twitching upright, her eyes darting to the door. Evan never pressed for details. He only made sure the locks were set, the chair wedged beneath the handle, so she could rest without fear. Slowly, Ashira's posture changed. The constant curl of her shoulders eased. Her tail, once held tight in anxious coils, began to swish lazily when she was comfortable. She teased him more openly, complaining about his bland cooking, mocking his habit of folding laundry with military precision, calling him too serious, with a sly grin. And yet, beneath the mischief, gratitude shone clear. When she thought he wasn't looking, her gaze softened. She ate without hoarding scraps. She slept deeply on the couch, no longer curling into defensive knots. One evening, as Evan set down 2 bowls of stew, Ashira leaned back in her chair, studying him with her head tilted. "Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why do you keep doing this? Feeding me. Letting me stay. You could have had your peace back." Evan shrugged, blowing on his spoon. "Peace is overrated. Company's better." She blinked at him, then laughed, a short, surprised sound that made her tail swish against the floor. In that laugh, he realized, the apartment finally felt like home. At first, Ashira's presence felt temporary, like a candle flickering in a draft. She always perched on the edges of rooms, on the couch arm instead of the cushions, on the floor instead of at the table. Her tail curled tight around her ankles like a rope, her eyes darting at every sound outside the window. She acted like she was bracing for the moment Evan would change his mind. But as the days passed, her edges softened. It showed in the way she started humming to herself while tidying the kitchen, soft little notes that broke the silence. She cleaned with a strange precision, her sharp nose and sharper eyes catching things Evan overlooked. She scrubbed the stove until it gleamed, swept crumbs from the corners, even mended a rip in his work shirt with thread she scavenged from an old kit. One evening he came home, bone-tired, and found a stew bubbling on the stove. Ashira stood barefoot, balancing awkwardly on tiptoe as she reached for a spice jar on the high shelf. Her ears flicked when she noticed him, and she made a noise halfway between a scoff and a laugh. "Don't just stand there," she said. "You're supposed to stir this while it simmers." Evan raised an eyebrow. "Since when are you the chef?" "Since I got sick of noodles." The stew was salty, a little uneven, but warm and filling. She watched him eat as if the verdict mattered more than anything, her ears twitching with each spoonful. When he gave a short nod, her whole body eased. He started noticing other things. The couch cushions smelled faintly of her, wild and warm, like pine needles after rain. His old jacket went missing more often, only to be found draped over her shoulders as she napped. The blanket he used in winter migrated to the couch. Ashira cocooned in it while she watched ancient sitcom reruns with fascination. Her gratitude came through in the smallest gestures. A clean shirt folded at the foot of his bed. A repaired chair leg done in silence while he worked late. Leftover meals portioned neatly in the fridge. She didn't gush or thank him outright, but her actions spoke louder. Of course, the jumpiness lingered. When a patrol drone buzzed past the window, her ears went flat and her eyes narrowed, following it until it disappeared. If strangers lingered too long in the hallway, she stiffened and slipped behind the curtain until the sound faded. Evan never pressed her about it. He simply made the locks loud and deliberate, exaggerating the clicks so she'd know she was safe. But there were cracks in her caution. Sometimes, when she teased him about his rigid routines or when she flicked her tail across his lap to make him scowl, there was light in her eyes. Mischief. Playfulness. The kind of personality only someone comfortable in their skin could reveal. And every night, when he set 2 plates at the table without comment, she joined him with less hesitation. The silence between them grew companionable. Natural. By then, Evan realized the apartment no longer felt empty when he came home. It felt alive. The night her walls finally cracked was quiet and heavy with rain. Evan sat on the couch, flipping through a battered book, while Ashira lingered in the kitchen longer than usual. He heard the sink run, the soft clink of dishes. When she emerged, her hair clung damply to her cheeks, her ragged shirt speckled with water. She stood in the doorway, tail swaying in restless arcs. "Evan," she said quietly. He looked up. "What's on your mind?" She crossed the room slowly, settling on the arm of the couch instead of the cushions. Her golden eyes fixed on him, brighter in the lamplight. She seemed to wrestle with her words before finally blurting them. "These weeks, they've been the safest I've felt in years." The confession cut through the room like a blade. She looked away quickly, ears flattening, as though she'd already said too much. Evan closed his book, giving her his full attention. "I don't wake up cold," she went on, her voice low and uncertain. I don't count scraps to see if they'll last until morning. I don't run every time I hear footsteps. Here with you, I don't feel hunted. Not like before. Her tail curled in tight around her knees. I almost forgot what that felt like. Evan rested his elbows on his knees, leaning forward slightly. Then don't forget. Stay. Her eyes flicked to him, disbelief stark across her face. Stay? Just like that? You make it sound simple. It is, he said. Stay as long as you want. No one's going to chase you out here. For a moment, silence stretched thin. The rain drummed against the glass, steady and rhythmic. Ashira let out a soft, shaky laugh, her ears lifting slightly. Careful. I might take you up on that forever. Wouldn't bother me. Her breath caught, in something halfway between a laugh and a sob. She looked at him, truly looked, as if weighing the sincerity in his eyes. And whatever she found there, it softened her. Slowly she leaned closer. Her damp hair brushed his shoulder, her golden eyes flicking down toward his mouth before darting back up again. You're strange, Evan Locke, she whispered. He smiled faintly. So I've been told. The closeness wasn't a kiss. But it held the same weight. A quiet moment teetering on the edge of something unspoken, both of them unwilling to pull away. Her tail slid across the couch cushions and rested against his arm, curling there like an unspoken claim. Either of them broke the silence. They didn't need to. In that small apartment, with rain whispering against the window and warmth thrumming between them, Evan realized he didn't just enjoy her company, he wanted it. And Ashira, for the first time in longer than she'd admit, allowed herself to believe she might finally belong. Outside, the city churned on with all its dangers. But inside, something fragile and undeniable had taken root. A beginning. Sparkles, and that's where we'll leave Evan and Ashira tonight. Tell me, would you have let her stay or sent her away? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to check out the full library of HFY and Vulpine tales waiting on the channel. You can binge them all right now. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next adventure.